First of all, death is an ever-present reality in Plath's poetry and manifest in several different way. जो सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट इसका थीम है ना वो डेथ है और सिल्विया प्लैथ ने इसके बारे में बहुत कुछ लिखा है. वन कॉमन थीम इज़ द वॉइड लेफ्ट बाय हर फादर्स डेथ. इन Full Fathom 5, Sylvia Plath की एक poem है in which she speaks of his death and burial, mourning that she is forever exiled. In the Colossus, she tries in vain to put him back together again and make him speak. In Daddy, she goes further in claiming that she wants to kill him herself, finally exercising his vicocious hold over her mind and her work. अच्छा ये ऑलमोस्ट 8 इयर्स की थी जब इसके फादर की डेथ हो गई थी, लेकिन ये चाहती थी कि वो उसको खुद मारे. इसके काफ़ी ग्रजेस थे अपने फादर के साथ, तो इसने बहुत कुछ लिखा भी है अपनी पोइट्री में उनके बारे में. एंड death is also dealt with in terms of suicide, which early corresponds to her own suicide attempts and eventual death by suicide. In Lady Lazarus, she claims that she has mastered the art of dying after trying to kill herself multiple times. She sneers that everyone is used to crowding in the watching her self-destruct. Suicide, though, is presented as a desirable alternative in many of these works. The poem suggests it would release her from the difficulties of life and bring her transcendence, wherein her mind could free itself from its corporeal cage. The desire is exhilaratingly expressed in Ariel. Ariel is the name of his poem, and bleakly and resigningly expressed in Edge. Death is an immensely vivid aspect of Plath's work, both in metaphorical and literal representation. Next theme is victimization. Plath felt like a victim to the men in her life, including her father, her husband, and a great male dominant literary world. Her poetry can often be understood as response to these feelings of victimization, and many of the poems with a male figure can be interpreted as referring to any or all of these male forces in the life. In regards to her father, she realized she could never escape his terrible hold over her. She expressed her sense of victimhood in the Colossus and Daddy. The Colossus and Daddy are the names of his poem, using powerful metaphors and comparisons to limn a man who figured heavily in her physique. Her husband also victimized her through the power he exerted as a man, both by assuming he should have the literary career and through his infidelity. Plath felt relegated to a subordinate feminine position which stripped from her any autonomy or power. Her poems from the Colossus era express her frustration over the strictures under which she operated. For instance, A Life evokes a menacing and bleak future for Plath. However, in her later poems, she seems finally able to transcend her status as victim by fully embracing her creative gifts. Metaphorically killing her father in Daddy and committing suicide in Lady Lazarus and Edge. The next important theme and is patriarchy. Plath lived and worked in 1950s and 1960s England and American societies, characterized by very strict gender norms. Women were expected to remain safely in consent in the house, with motherhood as their ultimate ultimate joy and goal. Women who ventured into the arts found it difficult to attain much attention for their work and were often subject to marginalization and disdain. Plath explored and challenged this reductionist tendency through her work, offering poems of intense vitality and stunning language. She depicted the bleakness of the domestic scene, the disappointment of pregnancy, the despair over her husband's infidelity, her tortured relationship with her father, and her attempts to find her own creative voice. Im, im, Amidst amidst the crushing weight of patriarchy. She shied away from using gentle language and avoided writing only the traditionally female topics. Most impressively, the works remain poetic and artistic rather than political because of her willing to admit ambivalence over all these expectations, admitting that both perspective can prove a trap. So, next theme is nature. Images and illusion to nature permeate Plath's poetry. She often evokes that sea and the fields to great effect. The sea is usually associated with her father. It is powerful, unpredictable, mesmerizing, and dangerous. In In Full Freedom 5, her father is depicted as a sea god. An image of the sea is also used in uh, contusion, there suggesting a terrible sense of loss and loneliness. She also pulled from her personal life, writing of horse riding on the English fields in Sheep in Fog and Ariel. In these cases, he uses the activity um, to suggest an otherworldly mystical arena in which creative thought or unfettered emotion can be expressed. Nature is also manifested in the bright red tulips which jolt the listless Plath from her post operation stupor, insisting that she return to the world of the living. Here, nature is a provoker, an instigator, it does not want her to give up. Nature is an ubiquitous theme in Plath's work. It is a potent force that is sometimes unpredictable but usually works to encourage her creative output. The self. Next theme is the self. Plath has often been grouped into the confessional movement of poetry. One of the reasons for this classification is that she wrote extensively of her own life, her own thoughts, her own worries. Any great artist both create his or her art and is created by it, and Plath was always endeavoring to know herself better through her writing. She tried to come to terms with her personal demons and tried to work through her problematic relationships. For instance, she tries to understand her ambivalence about motherhood and try to vent her rage at her failed marriage. However, her exploration of herself can also be understood as an exploration of the idea of the self as it stands opposed to society as a whole and to other people whom she did not particularly like. Joyce Carol Oates wrote that even Plath children seem to be merely the object of her perception rather than subjective extensions of herself. The specific of Plath's work were drawn from her life but endured to transcend those to ask more universal questions. Most infamously, Plath imagined herself as a Jew, Another wounded her persecuted victim. She also tried to engage with the idea of self in terms of the mind and body dialectic. Edge, the shape in fog are the poems, and these poems explore her desire to live the earthly life but expresses some ambivalence about what is come after. Ariel suggests it is glory and oneness with nature, but the other two poems do not seem to know what will happen to the mind or soul once the body is eradicated. The conflict between the self and the world outside can be used to understand almost all the Plath's poem. Next theme is the body. Many of Plath's poems deal with the body in terms of motherhood, wants, operation, and death. In metaphors she describes how her in metaphor is the name of his poem. She describes how her body does not feel like it is her own. She is simply a means towards delivering a child in tulips and alive. The body has undergone an operation. With the surgery comes an excising of emotion, attachment, connection, and responsibility. The physical cut has the physical cut has resulted in an emotional severing, which is a relief to the depressed woman. Cut is a poem by Sylvia Plath depicts the thrill Plath feels on almost cutting her own thumb off. It is suggested that she feels more alive as she contemplates her nearly decapitated thumb and watches the blood pool on the floor. Contusion is also a poem. It takes things further. She has received a bruise for some reason, but unlike in Cut, where she eventually seemed to grow uneasy with the wound, she seemed to welcome the physical pain since the bruise suggests an imminent end of her suffering. Suicide, the most profound and dramatic thing one can do to one's own body, is also central to many of her poems. Overall, it is clear that Plath has constantly discerning the relationship between mind and body and was fascinated with the implication of bodily pain. Next major theme is motherhood. Motherhood is a major theme in Plath's work, and she was profoundly ambivalent about this prescribed role for women, writing in metaphors about how she felt insignificant as a pregnant woman, a mere means to an end. She lamented how she looked and expressed her resignation over a perceived lack of options. However, in Child, she delights in her child's perception of an engagement with the world. Of course, Child is the name of his poem. Child ends with the suggestion that she knows her child will somebody see the harsh reality of life. Plath did not want her children to be contaminated by her own despair. This fear may also have manifested itself in her last poem, Edge, in which some critics have discerned a desire to kill her child and take them with her far from the terrors of life. Other poems in her oeuvre express the same tension. Overall, Plath clearly loved her children, but was not completely content in either pregnancy or motherhood. And this was all about the themes of Sylvia Plath.